Did you know in Australia at the moment you can get your soil tested for free? In Victoria, it's through the Gardensafe program. In other states, it's called Vegesafe. I'm going to get mine tested and let me show you how you can too. The Gardensafe program through EPA Victoria is all about you being able to get some information about your garden so that you know if that soil that you're growing things in is safe or not. Is there some contaminants and things in there that you might not have known about that might actually make it unsafe to be digging around in the garden and growing food in it? The other thing that it's for is EPA collecting information as well. So they're trying to collect information, particularly about our urban areas where there might be areas of poor backyard soil quality. Through the program, there's a variety of things that they're going to test for. And in fact, when you have a bit of a look at the information on their site, they talk about testing things like soil texture, composition, organic carbon, plant nutrients as well, and also some of those trace elements, things like arsenic, cadmium, chromium, copper, manganese, nickel, lead, and zinc. Now, they're not expecting you to be a soil scientist, so along with the results, you will actually get some information as well on how to interpret those results. So it'll let you know if you are over certain levels that are safe or not safe to use for certain purposes. You can access the program in a couple of different ways. You can go to the EPA website and find the Gardensafe page. Here there's a whole bunch of information about the program, and there's also a link to the Gardensafe website itself. Of course, you can also do a Google search and just go straight to Gardensafe. Once you're on the Gardensafe website, what you want to do is find the place on the page where it gets you to register. So here's our section here. We click on registration survey, and from here it'll collect a whole bunch of information about you, your address, your home, your garden, and then submit. From here you'll get your own personalized email, and I've actually already gone through this process, so I've already got my email. It'll give you a registration number and also gives you some details on how to collect an appropriate soil sample. And that's what we're going to do now. We're going to head out into the garden and we're going to grab our soil samples to send off to the EPA. To get set up, we need to grab 3 Ziploc bags. So I've got 3 here, and each of those need to be marked up with your name, your address, the date that you've taken the sample. There's also a unique ID that you'll be given on the email that comes back to you. And you also need to put a bit of an indicator for where you've taken your sample as well. So obviously each one of these 3 will be different for your sample ID. For example, you might take one from your front yard, one from your backyard, and one from your veggie patch. Just mark those up with a permanent marker so that those details stay on those bags when they're in the post. Next, I'm going to wash off the trowel that I'm going to use to take my sample. You can see on this one here, there's quite a bit of dirt from the last time I used this, so I just want to make sure that I wash that off, and I'll wash it off between each of the samples as well, just so that I know I'm getting just in the bag the soil from the location that I'm taking the sample from. Now, if you saw my recent garden harvest video, you would have heard me say that I was a little bit concerned about the soil in this area here where I'm growing my beetroot. I found they stayed really, really small, and the idea was to leave them a little bit longer to see if they just needed a bit more time, and a bit more time really hasn't helped. So I do suspect I might be missing something in the soil here, so I really want to do one of my soil tests in this location. Now, to get my soil test, what I need to do is just move aside some of this mulch that I've got on the surface. I don't want to get any of that into my sample, just to expose just that soil beneath, because it's the soil that I want to sample. Now, I don't want to scrape away too much of the surface soil though, because I do want to grab surface soil in this sample as well. Now, it says I need about half a cup, and in order to get about half a cup, it says to try and get the top 2 centimeters of soil in about I think it was a 15 centimeter by 15 centimeter kind of block. That's obviously a bit bigger than that there, but let's go for something like that. I'll get those weeds out of the way as well. And yeah, let's get some of this soil into our plastic bag from that top part of the soil. All right, let's just get that bit of mulch off as well. Now, there's quite a bit of organic matter in that. Yeah, is that going to work? Probably not, actually. So let's pop that to the side and let's see if I can get another spot over here where there's maybe not so much root. Lots of roots all through this area. All right, let's try again. Something about yay. And again, we're looking for about half a cup of soil. So still a bit of root matter in that, but that's fairly representative of the soil in this area, so I'm pretty happy to go with that one. All I do now is repeat this in the other two locations. This one here is one of our side garden beds. Again, just moving that mulch away from the surface. And again, I've got another bag here that's marked up. So this one here is our side bed, and in particular, our middle bed on our side beds. And again, I want to get about a half a cup of soil. And again, we're taking that bit from the top, about the top 2 centimetres. So there's a bit of root here again. Try and get a bit of that out. And again, we will just pop that in our bag. A bit too much. There we go. And we'll seal that one up too. The last area I want to test is on our slope out the front of the house, and this is where we've got a lot of our in situ soils. There has been a bit of disturbance over the years as the retaining wall and the like was built out the front, but there is the fairly natural soil that was on this property in this location. And it is relatively poor looking at it to the eyeball, being on quite a bit of a slope. And I'm guessing it's going to be representative of the decomposed granite that we have on a lot of the property here. So again, all I've done is I've exposed the soil, and now I'm going to try and carve out of this very hard soil another half a cup. Oh, that's really hard. So again, we're looking for a half a cup off the surface down to about 2 centimetres. All right. Might need to get a little bit into this bag and then dig in for a second lot, which I'm going to have to put down the camera because it's a bit tricky to do with one hand. Alright, I've just dug out a bit more. You can probably see the texture of this soil here is wildly different to what we were seeing in the veggie beds out the back. With those, we have actually brought some material in, and we've spent a lot of time building those up over the years, putting in a lot of manure from the property, our own compost that we make as well, and yeah, there's quite a notable difference in the quality. So it's going to be really interesting to see how the test results come back with this one. So here's our 3 different soil samples. There is the one from the veggie bed that we took first. And let's have a bit of a look in there at the way that one looks. This is fun with one hand. Alright. So that's what the soil from the first bed looks like. You can see quite organic. And then we've got the one that we took from the side bed here. Again, let's open it up and have a bit of a look inside. And again, we can see that that one is also quite organic looking. And then we've got the one from the front, and that one is the in situ soil from the property. And that one is really different when you have a bit of a look at that. Doesn't look very organic at all, and yeah, it definitely has a more visual look of being a poorer soil for growing. Anyway, what will be interesting is when we get our test results back to see what that says about the soil from these 3 locations. So all I'll do now is finish marking them up. Again, putting my name, address, date, the ID that came with the email, and I've already got my samples identified for the locations on each of these. And I will pop that in the post, and I'll come back to you in about 6 to 8 weeks with the results. It's now a few weeks later, and I've got my report back from the EPA, and I thought I'd give you a bit of a look at what it looks like. I also probably should let you know how I got the report. It didn't come in the mail, it was actually sent out to me electronically to the email address that I had provided when I sent in the samples. The report you get back breaks the results into 3 different areas. So you've got this table 1, table 2, and table 3. And in table 1, you've got the soil texture. So this is where it breaks it down into the percentage of sand, silt, and clay that you have in your material that you've sent in. And we can see that the material that I've got out the front was a little bit sandy and then had fairly similar proportions of silt and clay. Off the back of that, they've determined the soil texture to be a light clay, which is not too bad a texture to have. Our side beds, though, and our veggie bed were a lot more sandy. So we had 66% sand in our side beds and 74% in the veggie bed, which is kind of interesting because we did get that material, I'm pretty sure, from the same supplier back when we filled all those beds. So yeah, I suppose that makes sense then that, we've got that consistency in those sand levels, and the silt and the clay is fairly similar as well. Now, that percentage of sand is fairly high for your veggie beds, and what that means is that if we've got a sandy material and that material is going to drain quite a bit, and that makes sense because I do need to kind of keep the water up in that particular area, and as a result, you do tend to find that things can flush through that type of soil as well, your nutrients and things like that. So yeah, the test results show that I've got some sandy material in those side and veggie beds. Now, and I should kind of mention what the ideal is in this situation. So when you're talking about your vegetable sort of beds, what you want is a fairly even split of your sands, your silts, and your clays, and that really is kind of your ideal for vegetable growing type conditions. All right, next one is our table 2, which is the results of the soil health indicator assessment. So this is where they look at things like your total organic carbon, which is what it means when it's got this TOC percentage here. And I can see in my front bed, it was lower, in the front garden, it was lower than it was in my side and veggie beds, which kind of makes sense because the in situ soil, I don't really add much in the way of organics to, except for the fact that we put some mulch on the surface. But in our side beds and veggie bed, we do add organics in there. We make our own compost, we add lots of pea straw and things like that in there as well. But it's still really quite low, which I'm, I suppose, a little bit surprised about. But then again, having a look at the soil, yes, by that visual sort of look at it, it's not got a huge amount of organic in it, despite the fact that we do put all those additional organics in there. So what this is telling me is I actually need to do a little bit more work on adding organics into my garden, especially those side beds and the veggie bed down the bottom, because 3% is fairly low. You can be looking up to about 10% in a decent level of organic matter in a veggie garden. So I'll definitely be doing a little bit of work to try and bump that up based on these results. Next in the table, we've got our phosphorus, and we can see that the front garden is definitely a lot lower than those side and veggie beds, which does kind of make sense because I don't add a lot of fertilizers out the front, and this is telling me that I probably need to add a little bit of phosphorus out there, and that'll be good because phosphorus is helpful with your healthy roots and fruits and flowers and things like that, and that's where our orchard out the front is, our edible garden is. So all of those fruits that we're growing and always taking out of that garden will be taking that phosphorus out of the ground. So I just need to top that up again, and that's what that shows me. The side bed and the veggie bed, though, they're not looking too bad. So the standard sort of figures that you're looking at is around 3,000 to 3,500 for your phosphorus, and that's within the realm. Next in our table 2 is our potassium, which is what the K is here. This is kind of interesting in the results. So this is showing that I've got super high levels of potassium out there. So the standard sort of figures is around 4,000 to 5,500, and this is well in exceedance in this area out the front. So again, that's kind of the in situ soil here. Yeah, and to be honest, I can't explain that one right now, so I need to have a bit of a think on why that might be so high. It's definitely not because we've added anything to the soil since we've been here. There may have been some type of previous use that's added some really excessive levels. Now, normally potassium is a good thing. It supports overall plant well-being, but when you've got super high levels, it can actually restrict growth of plants, particularly the mature tissue growth. So that one there being as high as it is a little bit of a concern. I probably need to have a bit of a think about what has actually potentially gone on there in the past. It's one of those things that when you move into property, sometimes things have happened on those properties in the past and you never know what might have happened. And that's why it's good to do this type of testing, because you want to make sure that there's not actually something there that's causing contamination that could be affecting the food that you eat. So anyway, not concerned that that one's dangerous, but I do want to have a bit of a think about it. The next is our side beds and our veggie bed levels of potassium. Standard sort of ranges, again, 4,000 to 5,500. These are really not too outside of the realm, but what it's telling me is I definitely don't need to be adding any potassium type fertilizers into this soil at the moment. All right, let's have a look at our table 3. So this last one here is the one that's probably of most relevance when you're trying to work out if your ground is safe to grow in or not. And that's because this is where it's looking at the trace elements, which can also be things that are contaminants in soils. And here in Victoria, we've got a thing called the HIL, HILs, and they are basically what's the health investigation levels. And if you get levels of these types of materials or contaminants in your soils, that can suggest that there's been some kind of historical contamination, and it could actually mean that it's really not good for you to eat your vegetables, particularly if you're dealing with something like, really high levels of arsenic or high levels of lead and things like that. So the EPA has chosen some of the ones of significance. And these are really the ones behind the program. They're trying to ensure that, we have the ability to test and ensure that our soils are safe and not over these levels. So with the hills, there is different levels like A's and B's, etc., for different types of land use. And the A is basically the guideline level for safe growing and, taking those materials out of those soils and being able to eat them and know that you're eating something safe. So in this one, what they do is they have the different levels that they've detected, but they also put in here the guideline levels. So that's really useful for when you're trying to interpret your results. It makes it a little bit easier. So you can very easily look down and go, am I over or above? None of the figures that I have are anywhere near those health investigation levels. It'd be quite interesting to see one of these reports if you were, do they flag it red or something like that to let you know that you need to do something. BD is basically below detection, so that's not necessarily a bad thing. You can see here that there's things like 14, 10 in my side beds and my veggie bed for arsenic, which is what the AS is. Don't stress when you see that sort of thing, particularly in areas around Victoria. There's natural levels of these things in the soils, and that's why there is this kind of limit in terms of what's safe and what's not. And as you can see, those figures are well below. So nothing in this table that I'm too stressed about. If you were getting levels that were of significance, they do actually give you a bit of info on here in terms of what to do. So below the guideline, carry on gardening. If you're approaching the guideline, it gets you to kind of think about, how you could reduce any further contribution to kind of adding to those levels. Can be quite difficult if you've got some high levels of, something historical, if you've got additional levels of lead coming in because maybe there's deposition because you live next to heavy industry or something like that. But definitely you want to think about not adding extras in if there's anything within your control. And if you are above the guideline, it talks about then, what that means, and whether it's meaningful in terms of there being potentially a bit of a health risk there if you were to continue growing and what you can do about that. So definitely if you've got that kind of level, I'd be doing a bit more investigation and kind of considering what I use that soil for. You might look at moving to something like raised beds and bringing in some clean soil and growing in those areas instead. So that's my report. There is further information kind of on the website which will help you when you're kind of interpreting your report as well, if you are struggling to read through it. I will say that background that I have in environmental science has probably helped me a little bit in reading through this and understanding the significance of certain things. Definitely having worked with contaminated land and the like in the past has helped with understanding things like, the hills and what that means. But if you are struggling, I'd probably recommend you have a bit of a look at your report in conjunction with the website. And of course, if you do find anything that is of super concern to you and you are looking for advice on what to do, there is a lot of experts out there that do consultancy work in this space as well that might be able to give you a bit of additional advice. Hopefully this is helpful to you if you decide to get your soil tested through the Gardensafe program. Thanks for joining, and catch you later.